Throughout history, only 18 women have been sentenced to death in the United States. 3 of them remain on death row today, while the others have already faced execution. In this video, we'll uncover the crimes that led them here, their final meals, and the haunting last words they left behind. Let's begin. Velma Barfield was the first woman to be executed in the United States after the Supreme Court reinstated the death penalty in 1976. She was 52 years old at the time of her execution, and her case shocked the country not only because of her crimes, but because she became a symbol of controversy around female executions. Barfield's story unfolded in North Carolina. Over the span of several years, she poisoned multiple individuals, including her own boyfriend, using arsenic-laced food and drinks. Initially, suspicions surrounded her only for the death of her partner, but investigations revealed a darker pattern. Velma had left behind a trail of mysterious deaths linked to her. Despite claiming remorse and undergoing a religious transformation while incarcerated, the severity of her actions left little room for clemency. Her execution by lethal injection took place on November 2nd, 1984. When asked if she had any final words, Velma said, "I'm sorry for everything I ever did." Her last meal was a humble choice, perhaps reflecting her repentance: cheeseburgers, French fries, and a Coca-Cola. Velma Barfield's death marked a turning point, reigniting national debates about the morality of capital punishment, especially regarding women, a subject that remains divisive to this day. Karla Faye Tucker's execution on February 3, 1998, in Texas, drew intense national and international attention. She was 38 years old at the time of her death and became one of the most controversial cases in modern death row history. Tucker's crime was brutal and chilling. In 1983, at the age of 23, she and her accomplice entered the home of a man they knew and murdered him and another woman, using a pickaxe. The crime was not only vicious but deeply personal. Reports later revealed that Tucker showed no remorse at the time, even laughing about the murders. However, during her years on death row, Karla Faye underwent a profound religious conversion, becoming a devout Christian. She expressed deep regret for her actions and became a vocal advocate for faith and redemption behind bars. Her transformation stirred public debate, with many calling for her sentence to be commuted, including religious leaders, public figures, and even international authorities. Ultimately, the appeals were denied, and she was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. Before her execution, Karla Faye offered her final words: "I am going to be face to face with Jesus now." For her last meal, she kept it simple and modest: a salad, a banana, and a peach. Karla Faye Tucker's case remains one of the most emotionally charged and widely discussed executions of a female inmate in American history. On March 30, 1998, Judy Buenoano became the first woman executed in Florida since 1848. She was 54 years old at the time of her death and had earned a chilling nickname from the press, the Black Widow. Judy's crimes spanned over a decade and involved a calculated series of murders. She was convicted of killing her husband by poisoning him with arsenic, staging the death to look like a natural illness. Years later, she murdered her own disabled son by drowning him during a canoe trip. Additionally, she was found guilty of orchestrating the murder of her fiancé to collect life insurance money. Investigations revealed a cold and methodical pattern. Judy would manipulate and eliminate those close to her for financial gain, showing little to no remorse along the way. Her execution by electric chair at Florida State Prison marked a grim moment in U.S. history, particularly because of the rare use of this method on a female prisoner. When given the opportunity to speak before her execution, Judy refused to make a final statement. No final words were recorded. Her last meal was simple yet substantial: steak, broccoli, and asparagus. Judy Buenoano's case remains a chilling example of betrayal, manipulation, and cold-blooded murder. A woman whose carefully hidden darkness ultimately led her to the electric chair. On February 24, 2000, Betty Lou Beets was executed by lethal injection at the age of 62 in Texas. Her case stood out not only because of the brutality involved, but also because of the deep layers of deception that surrounded her crimes. Betty Lou's criminal history was tied to a life marked by turbulent relationships. Over her lifetime, she had been married 6 times to 5 different men. It was the disappearance of her 5th husband, Jimmy Don Beets, that eventually led to her downfall. In 1983, Betty Lou shot and killed Jimmy Don, later burying his body under a wishing well she had built in her backyard. When investigators began looking into his disappearance, they discovered that Betty Lou had also killed another former husband, Doyle Wayne Barker, whose remains were buried in a garage on the same property. Authorities uncovered that Betty Lou had plotted these murders for financial gain, seeking to collect life insurance money and pension benefits. Before her execution, when asked if she had any final words, Betty Lou Beets simply said, "I have no final statement," and she didn't request a final meal. On May 2nd, 2000, Christina Riggs was executed by lethal injection in Arkansas at the age of 28. Her case shocked the nation, not only for the horrific nature of her crime, but also for the tragic, complex emotions that surrounded it. Christina Riggs was a licensed nurse who had struggled with depression for years. In November 1997, she made a chilling decision that would forever define her life. She took the lives of her 2 young children, Justin, age 5, and Shelby, age 2. During her trial, Christina showed little resistance. She openly admitted to the murders, expressing that she believed death was the only way to save her children from what she saw as an inevitable future of suffering. Despite her defense team arguing severe mental illness, the jury found her guilty and sentenced her to death. Christina Riggs did not fight her execution. In fact, she waived her appeals and requested that her sentence be carried out as swiftly as possible. In her final words, she said, "There is no way killing me is going to bring them back." For her last meal, she chose comfort snacks instead of a traditional plate, a bag of Doritos Cool Ranch chips and a cherry Coke. Christina Riggs's case remains one of the most haunting examples of how deep personal despair can lead to unimaginable tragedy on death row. On January 11, 2001, Wanda Jean Allen was executed by lethal injection in Oklahoma at the age of 41. Her case drew national attention, raising debates about mental health, past trauma, and the death penalty. Wanda Jean Allen's crime was the murder of her former girlfriend, Gloria Jean Leathers, in 1988. The 2 women had a volatile and often violent relationship. After an intense argument outside an Oklahoma City police station, where they had gone seeking help to end their confrontation peacefully, Wanda shot Gloria in the abdomen. Gloria later died in the hospital from her wounds. What made Wanda's case particularly complex was her background. She had a documented history of low IQ, brain damage from an earlier childhood injury, and a life marked by poverty and instability. Some advocates argued that her intellectual limitations should have been grounds for a life sentence rather than the death penalty. However, prosecutors maintained that Wanda's actions were calculated and that she had committed a previous homicide years earlier, though she had served time for manslaughter. Throughout her years on death row, Wanda Jean Allen maintained a composed demeanor. Religious groups, activists, and public figures campaigned for clemency, but their efforts ultimately failed. Before her execution, for her last meal, she chose a Southern classic, fried chicken, okra, and a salad, a simple yet meaningful meal that connected her to her roots. Wanda Jean Allen's execution stirred lasting debates about mental impairment and justice, and her story remains a significant chapter in the broader discussion about fairness in the American death penalty system. On May 10, 2002, Linda Lionblock was executed by electrocution in Alabama at the age of 54. Her case was particularly notable for several reasons: the nature of her crime, her extreme anti-government views, and the method of her execution. She was one of the last women in the United States to die in the electric chair. Linda Lionblock, along with her common-law husband George Sibley, was deeply entrenched in anti-government ideology. They believed that state and federal governments had no authority over them, refusing to carry driver's licenses, pay taxes, or recognize any official jurisdiction. Their beliefs would ultimately lead to a deadly confrontation. In October 1993, while sitting in a parking lot with expired tags, they were approached by Sergeant Roger Motley of the Opelika Police Department. What began as a routine stop quickly escalated into violence. Linda and Sibley opened fire on Motley, shooting him in broad daylight in front of witnesses. Despite the officer's attempts to survive, he died from his wounds shortly after. During her trial, Linda showed no remorse, maintaining that the government was corrupt and had no right to prosecute her. The jury convicted her of capital murder, and she was sentenced to death. In her final moments, Linda Lyon Block refused to give any last words. No final statement was made. She also declined a special last meal, choosing instead to eat the standard prison meal served that day. Linda Lyon Block's execution served as a grim reminder of how extreme ideologies can spiral into deadly violence, and marked the end of an era as executions by electric chair became increasingly rare across the United States. On October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. She was 46 years old. Her case remains one of the most infamous and heavily publicized involving a female serial killer in American history. Wuornos's life story was a spiral of tragedy, violence, and survival on society's margins. Abandoned as a child, she endured years of abuse and homelessness, surviving largely through sex work. Between 1989 and 1990, Aileen shot and killed 7 men across Florida. She claimed that the murders were acts of self-defense against clients who had attempted to assault her, although later interviews suggested a mix of self-defense and robbery motives. Her arrest came after a complex investigation involving undercover officers, wiretaps, and betrayals from people she had trusted. The media swiftly sensationalized her story, painting her as a monster, but also exposing the deep traumas that had shaped her violent path. Throughout her years on death row, Aileen Wuornos's behavior became increasingly erratic. She spoke of conspiracies against her, mind control, and a desire to leave the earth as soon as possible. For her last meal, she made a surprising choice: a simple cup of coffee. In her final moments, Wuornos gave one of the most memorable last statements ever recorded. "I'll be back, like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all, I'll be back." On September 14, 2005, Frances Newton was executed by lethal injection in Texas at the age of 40. Her case sent shockwaves across the nation, a tragic story of betrayal within the very core of her own family. Frances Newton was convicted of murdering her husband, Adrian, and their 2 young children, Alton and Farah, in April 1987. Investigators discovered that she had recently taken out life insurance policies on all 3 victims, totaling around $100,000, just weeks before the killings. The evidence pointed to financial desperation as her motive, as Newton was reportedly facing mounting debts. The crime scene was chilling. All 3 family members had been shot with a .25 caliber pistol, and investigators later tied the weapon to Frances. When the time came for her execution, Frances Newton spoke briefly and with a tone of calm faith. "I know I'm going home to be with Jesus." Her final meal was simple and familiar: chicken nuggets, French fries, and a salad. On September 23, 2010, Teresa Lewis was executed by lethal injection in Virginia at the age of 41. Her execution stirred national and international outrage as debates flared over issues of mental capacity, manipulation, and moral responsibility. Teresa Lewis orchestrated the murders of her husband, Julian Lewis, and her stepson, Charles Lewis Jr., in 2002. She conspired with 2 men she had met shortly before, Matthew Schallenberger and Rodney Fuller, promising them part of the life insurance payouts in exchange for carrying out the killings. The motive was simple and devastating: greed. Teresa stood to gain around $250,000 from the deaths. The murders were carried out as planned. Her husband and stepson were shot while they slept in their home in Pittsylvania County, Virginia. Investigators soon uncovered the conspiracy. In her final moments, Teresa Lewis showed deep emotion. Her last words were directed toward the families of her victims and her own loved ones. "I want everybody to know I love you." Her final meal reflected classic Southern comfort: fried chicken, peas, apple pie, and a Dr. Pepper. On June 26, 2013, Kimberly McCarthy was executed by lethal injection in Texas at the age of 52. Her case was marked by brutal violence, personal downfall, and an intense debate about race and justice in the American legal system. McCarthy, a former occupational therapist battling drug addiction, was convicted of the 1997 murder of her 71-year-old neighbor, Dorothy Booth. In a desperate attempt to fund her crack cocaine habit, McCarthy entered Booth's home under false pretenses, stabbed her multiple times, and then severed her finger to steal her diamond wedding ring. Before her execution, Kimberly requested a substantial final meal. She chose a traditional Southern-style meal: steak, a baked potato, mixed vegetables, and iced tea. When it came time for her final words, Kimberly McCarthy delivered a calm and composed statement: "This is not a loss. This is a win." On February 5, 2014, Suzanne Margaret Basso was executed by lethal injection in Texas at the age of 59. Her case remains one of the most disturbing examples of cruelty and exploitation ever seen in the history of death row. Basso was convicted for the brutal torture and murder of Louis Buddy Musso, a mentally disabled man whom she had lured with promises of love and marriage. Suzanne intended to collect the victim's life insurance and disability benefits. Unlike many inmates, Suzanne Basso did not request a special last meal. Instead, she was served the standard prison meal provided to all inmates. As for her final moments, Basso refused to make a final statement. No final words were recorded. On September 30th, 2015, Kelly Renee Gissendanner was executed by lethal injection in Georgia at the age of 47. Her case stood out because she did not physically carry out the murder herself, but orchestrated it, a detail that fueled ongoing debates about moral responsibility and the death penalty. Kelly was convicted of masterminding the murder of her husband, Douglas Gissendanner, in 1997. She manipulated her lover, Gregory Owen, into carrying out the act. For her final meal, Kelly chose a comfort-heavy selection: nacho cheese dip with chips, chicken fajitas, and a diet lemonade. In her final moments, Kelly offered a powerful farewell by singing the hymn, "Amazing Grace," with a steady voice. Her final act was singing rather than speaking. On January 13th, 2021, Lisa Montgomery was executed by lethal injection at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana. Her crime is considered one of the most gruesome and shocking ever committed by a woman on death row. Lisa Montgomery's descent into darkness culminated in 2004 when she brutally murdered Bobby Jo Stinnett, a pregnant woman, in Skidmore, Missouri. When it came to her final meal, Lisa did not request anything special. During her final moments, when asked if she had any last words, Lisa simply responded, "No." On January 3, 2023, Amber McLaughlin was executed by lethal injection in Missouri at the age of 49. Her execution made national headlines, not only because of the nature of her crime, but also because she was the first openly transgender person executed in U.S. history. Amber McLaughlin was convicted for the 2003 murder of her former girlfriend, Beverly Genther. After their relationship ended, Amber began stalking Beverly, repeatedly violating restraining orders issued against her. For her last meal, Amber requested a straightforward, almost comforting selection: a cheeseburger, French fries, a strawberry milkshake, and a pack of M&Ms. In her final statement, Amber spoke with emotion and regret. "I am a loving and caring person. She expressed remorse for her actions and gratitude toward those who had supported her throughout her life and appeals.